Good morning, everybody. I think we're here. I think we're awake. I think we just enjoyed worshiping God. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. There we go. Okay. Are you excited about 2026? Are you feeling in general optimistic, unsure? You're very unsure about giving me anything. 2026, okay, yep. 2026 is going to be an interesting year, I think, for our church as we embrace our new pastor. And I'm really interested to see what direction our church goes in. But I'm also gratefully acknowledging that in the last year, despite not having an official minister or pastor, we know that God was our shepherd. Amen? Amen. It is He who leads this church, right? And so I'm excited to see what will happen. And as I share this message with you today, I hope that there will be something there that might encourage you or challenge you to have a think about what 2026 might look like for you, for our church, for your part in our church. So that is my prayer as I share this message with you today. But I'm going to actually say a prayer before we begin. So I'm just going to ask you to close your eyes. Father God, thank you so much that you have brought us here today to enjoy your Sabbath, to find our rest and our refreshing in you. I thank you for the Sabbath, and I thank you for this church family where we can come freely and spend this time with each other and with you. As we enjoy, hopefully, the message today, as we listen to the message today, Father, I just ask that it is you who speaks to our hearts, that you present the message that you want us to hear, that you prepare our heart to be open to hear whatever it is that you know that we need at this time. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, we are going to read today two stories that actually are very connected, although we don't often read them together. They are found in Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 to 33. Now I'm doing something very unusual today. I have nothing on the screen, which means if you want to follow along with the story, you'll need to find it in your Bible or scoot along next to someone else who has a Bible. I will be reading it in the New Living Translation today. And we're going to go through verse by verse and stop and have a think about what each verse is saying. So Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 to 33. So while you're finding that, I just want to ask you a question though. Has anybody here seen the TV show Muster Dogs? Oh, hooray. When I asked them at Collinsvale, they gave me a blank look. I'm glad that someone will know what I'm talking about. Tony and I discovered Muster Dogs last year, and we watched all 3 seasons. Found it very, very interesting, and learnt quite a bit about what's involved in training a dog. We don't have a dog at the moment, but one of the things that I learned is this thing called a Bluetooth connection. So in the show Muster Dogs, breeders have a litter of puppies, and they're usually either Kelpies or Border Collies, and they give their best puppies to some farmers who have agreed to be part of the show, and it is then up to the farmer to train the dog as best they can. And then there's a little test that they go through at the end, and they try and figure out who was the best dog and trainer, or sometimes even who was the best breed. So they're training the dogs to be working dogs. But the first thing that they do, before they get to any of the working dog stuff, the first thing they have to do is establish something called a Bluetooth connection. And this means that the dog will feel connected to their owner even when there is no physical connection. So even without a leash, the dog will feel that they are connected to their owner. They will be focused on, fixated even on their owner, on listening to their owner, on obeying their owner, on pleasing their owner. And even if you were to walk several meters away from them, the dog is still focused on their owner at all times. So that's the first thing that they have to establish. Now, a few years ago, we had a dog, and she had working dog heritage, although for us she was a pet and she never would have been trained as a working dog. But she was a border collie, which is a sheepdog, crossed with a blue coolie, which is a cattle dog. So very trainable dog. And so I took her to puppy or dog training classes and put her through her paces, and she did really well. She even won the blue ribbon for her class as the best dog in her class at the time. So she was very trainable, very obedient. And one of the trainers said to me that one of the reasons that was because she just wanted to please me. That was everything to her in that moment, was to please me. And so apparently we had this Bluetooth connection, even though I didn't know then that that's what it was called. But the thing with Molly is that if I trained her at the training ground, no worries. If I trained her in my backyard where she felt safe and secure, no worries, so obedient. If I took her outside of her comfort zone, she had terrible anxiety. And all of her training just flew out the window, and that Bluetooth connection was broken. And I could not trust her outside of her comfort zone because her anxiety overtook everything else. Today's story is about our connection with God. And I want us to notice in the story the things that are helping that connection and the things that are hindering that connection. But I also want us to notice some positional elements in the story. So the ways in which people are coming, or the ways in which they are going, they are being pushed away. There's a lot of coming and going in today's stories. So we're going to start reading now, and we're going to read verse by verse. So Matthew chapter 14, starting at verse 13. So it says, "As soon as Jesus heard the news, he left in a boat to a remote area to be alone. But the crowds heard where he was headed and followed on foot from many towns." So what is this news that Jesus has heard? Unfortunately, it's the news that his cousin, John the Baptist, has been beheaded. And you can imagine how traumatic it was for him to hear that news, not just from the point of view of a family loss, but also from the point of view of why and how it happened and what Jesus' own future was going to look like. This was a difficult thing to hear. This story is not just told in Matthew, it's also told in Mark and in John. And we find out in Mark's version that there were some other things going on at the same time. So Jesus' disciples had just returned. They had just come back from a mission trip. He had sent them out on their own for the first time. And they had just returned, and they wanted to share with him how the trip had gone. But the place where they were staying was so busy. There were so many people coming and going all the time that it says they weren't even able to get something to eat. No time even for basic care for themselves. And so Jesus actually suggests in Mark chapter 6 verse 31 that they go off by themselves to a quiet place to have a rest. That sounds nice, doesn't it? A little holiday, have Jesus to themselves. Sounds lovely, right? Have you ever really needed time alone? I'm an introvert. And my family can attest to this, I get really a little bit grumpy if I don't get that time to myself. The disciples and Jesus, they really needed this time alone. So we're going to read verse 14, but I'm actually going to read the second half of verse 13 again so that it will make sense. But the crowds heard where he was headed and followed on foot from many towns. Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. So Jesus and the disciples have headed off in their boat for some quiet time, to be alone. And the crowds, they've raced around the outside of the lake on foot and got there ahead of them. And so when they get there, the first thing they see is this huge crowd. This crowd of people that they were trying to have some space from for a little while is right there. How do you think the disciples felt? I know how I would have felt, and it doesn't do me any credit. I think I would have felt like, oh no, I really needed that time. But what is Jesus' response? It says that he had compassion on them. The word compassion literally is com, meaning with, and passion, meaning suffering. So to suffer with someone. It is a strong sense of sympathy for what someone is going through, along with a desire to relieve their suffering. So it's more than a feeling, it's an action. And Jesus demonstrates that as he draws them to himself, recognizes their needs. He heals them, their physical needs. But when we read the other versions of this story, he also preaches and teaches. So he cares for their spiritual needs. He draws them to himself to have their needs met. Let's read verse 15. That evening the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy food for themselves." So the disciples have also identified a need. And the need is hunger. Have you ever felt hunger? And I'm not talking about appetite, I'm talking about true hunger. It's not a pleasant feeling, is it? But it's a feeling that was very familiar to these people because there was no food security for them. So this need that the disciples have recognized is a real need. That's the first part of compassion, right? To recognize the need. But what was different about the attitude of the disciples? How did they handle this situation? Instead of calling people to come to Jesus to have their need met, they said, send them away so that they can meet their own needs in the surrounding villages. They meant well, but they were overwhelmed by the scale of the problem. Have you ever felt that way? Where you felt sympathy for an issue, but felt overwhelmed to do anything about it? Let's read verses 16 to 18. But Jesus said, "That isn't necessary. You feed them." "But we have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here," he said. Okay, Jesus is asking the impossible. You feed them. Why would he ask the impossible? Well, there was a lesson that he needed the disciples to learn. In fact, in John's version of this story, John 6 verse 6, it says that Jesus already knew what he was going to do. But he wanted the disciples to learn the futility of self-dependence. Sometimes self-dependence leads us to not even try because a problem is too big. I can't possibly do that. Sometimes self-dependence leads us to be overconfident. Yeah, sure, I can manage. I think in this case it's the first. I think the disciples were overwhelmed by the scale of the problem, and they thought they couldn't handle this problem because they had only a little. We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. We have only a little lunch. What can that do? What does Jesus say? Bring them here. Don't send them away. Bring the people here. Bring your only a little here. And then Jesus models not self-dependence, but God-dependence, because he looks up to heaven. He makes sure everybody knows where this miracle is coming from. Let's read about it in verses 19 to 21. Then he told the people to sit down on the grass. Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up toward heaven and blessed them. Then breaking the loaves into pieces, he gave the bread to the disciples, who distributed it to the people. They all ate as much as they wanted, and afterward the disciples picked up 12 baskets of leftovers. About 5,000 men were fed that day, in addition to all the women and children. So not only does Jesus model God dependence as he does this miracle, but he also shows us what it means to be a disciple. The model of a disciple is for us to bring him our little and let him transform it, and then take from him what we need to share with others. There is no self-dependence at any stage of that process. We bring our little to him, but he does the work of transforming it. And then we take from him what we need to share with others. I love that in verse 20 it says they all ate as much as they wanted. If you've got a New International Version, it says they were all satisfied. Imagine in a culture where hunger was the norm, experiencing eating as much as you wanted, being satisfied. It was more than that though, because they didn't just get as much as they wanted, did they? There was more than they wanted. There was an abundance. We still recognize needs around us today, and they can still include hunger. Hunger is still a need today, but there are so many other things too: physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual needs. Imagine the needs that you recognize around you today being satisfied. Isn't that an extraordinary thing? But in the story today, there's a problem. In John's version of this story, in John chapter 6, he tells us that the people were so impressed by this miracle that they decided that it was time to crown Jesus king. And everything we know about the disciples and their expectations suggests that they went along with this plan too. Can you imagine the excitement as they thought that the moment has come? Our king has arrived and he can feed us, and we can be satisfied. But this was not the plan. This was not God's plan. Jesus knew that this could not happen now, and in fact it would not happen at all in the way they expected. And he needed to do something about it, which explains what happens in verse 22. Let's read that now. Immediately after this, so after the miracle that's just happened, and after they've tried to crown Jesus king, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. Again, Jesus is trying to teach the disciples something about self-dependence. They must learn not to rely on their own judgment about what should happen, but to trust him and his plan. And because they were not willing to do that, because they were relying on their own judgment in trying to make him king, he actually needs to send them away. They are still too self-dependent. Okay, verses 23 and 24. After sending them home, He went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen and they were fighting heavy waves. Jesus finally got his quiet time. How did he spend it? Last year, I challenged myself, and it's a challenge I haven't completed yet, but I've challenged myself to try and find healthy ways of responding to feeling depleted. And I do often feel tired and depleted, and there's not a lot I can do about that with my health. But I thought, how am I responding to that? Because it's very easy to say, you know what? I need more rest. I need more time on the couch. I need to say no to more things. Maybe I need to eat more for energy. There are all these unhealthy ways that I respond to that. And I look at this story and I think, is Jesus giving me the answer? Is he showing me what I need to do when I feel depleted? That rather than trying to use my self-dependence, I guess, to sort that out myself, to meet my own needs, that what I really need to do is connect to the source of my power, my energy, and my vitality. Maybe prayer is the answer that I need. Could we tap into more power with more prayer? This might be where God dependence is nurtured. Now, for me personally, I struggle with prayer. I love Bible study, but I find my mind wanders off when I pray. So that's my New Year's resolution for this year, Theo. And I appreciated Ethan's message last week that sort of got me started on that. But prayer is something I really want to work on. But how about you? Are there things that get in your way? Meanwhile, while Jesus is praying, the boat is in trouble. Now, the disciples, they've had this really tough day of highs and lows. So, they started the day tired but happy after their mission trip. Then their quiet time got interrupted, so that was a bit of a low. But then they saw this amazing miracle. And then they thought, it's time to crown Jesus King, the highest of highs. But then their hopes were dashed and they were sent away. And if that wasn't low enough, now they're battling a storm. Do you think they were physically drained? Emotionally drained? Maybe they even felt a little bit foolish about what had happened when they tried to crown Jesus King and that hadn't come off. Do you think maybe they even felt a little bit rejected because he sent them away? Let's read verse 25 and 26. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost." As if this day wasn't bad enough. It was 3 a.m. They'd been fighting the elements all night. They were exhausted. Again, Jesus is showing them the futility of self-dependence, because in all that time they hadn't gotten far. And this is the thing with self-dependence. It doesn't get us far, but it is exhausting. Let's read verse 27. But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage. I am here." In the Greek, that phrase is literally just, "I am." Take courage, I am. And it's sometimes translated, "The I am is here." The eternal one is here. Your creator God is here. Don't be afraid. Take courage. I am is here. Okay, as we read the rest of the story, I want to do something a little bit different. I want to divide you up into two groups. You don't have to move, you don't have to do anything, but I want you to use what Pastor Mark would call your sanctified imagination. And this side of the church, I want you to place yourself in Peter's sandals, okay? So you're going to try and imagine that you're Peter and try and understand how Peter's experience might have been. You guys are going to be the disciples, the rest of the disciples in the boat. And you're also going to try and imagine what your reaction might have been, particularly your reaction to what was happening with Peter. Okay? So you don't have to say anything. I mean, you can if you like. But yeah, just think it through in your mind as we go through. So we're going to read verse 28. Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." Peter, what on earth were you thinking? Where did that idea come from? Oh yeah, I can walk on water? Oh my goodness. You guys, what did you think when Peter said that? Like, Peter's always impulsive, right? But that's another level, isn't it? Where did that come from, Peter? Okay, let's read verse 29 and 30. "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. Don't you like the way it just states that as though it's perfectly normal? Yeah, just walked on the water. There's not even an exclamation mark in my Bible. Verse 30, "But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. 'Save me, Lord,' he shouted." Okay, Peter, what did you think when Jesus said, "Yeah, come"? Did you think, "Oh, yeah, that's exciting"? Or did you go, "Oh, no, now I've got to follow through with that"? What did you guys think when Jesus said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead, Peter"? Were you a bit surprised? Now, the logistics of getting out of the boat. The boat is still moving up and down. The waves are still strong. The wind is still strong. Peter, you've got one leg over the side of the boat. You're balancing on the edge. You tentatively reach down a foot. How did you feel when it touched water and didn't go through? Oh my goodness. What did you others think when you saw him actually standing there on the water? Wow. But then, Peter, your focus shifted. What happened? All of a sudden, you found yourself sinking. Now, I often imagine this story in my mind. I'm quite visual, so I've got a picture of this story as I'm sharing it with you. Usually in my mind, Peter sinks slowly, kind of like one of those elevator things, he's just, "Save me, Lord." Of course, that's not how it would have happened, is it? Like, he didn't have time to process anything. He's just sinking, and just before his head goes under, he just has time to call out, "Save me, Lord." Peter, that must have been so frightening. Let's read verse 31. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me?" Okay, just before we unpack that verse, I want to tell you a little story, because as I was thinking about the circumstances of Peter's focus shifting, I don't know about you, but I often wonder why. Why when he was focused on Jesus and he was doing it, why did his focus suddenly shift? And it reminded me of something that happened to me, nothing as impressive as walking on water, let me just start with that. But a few years ago, we were given a kayak. And I'd only taken it out a couple of times, but one day I decided I was going to take it out and I was going to kayak from our beach at South Arm. I was going to head south down the coast until I got to the point where I could see the gap between Bruny Island and the bottom of South Arm and see out to the ocean. And I thought, well, I don't think that'll be far. So I headed off kayaking, and it was all very nice, and there was salmon jumping out of the water, and I made sure I didn't get too close to the shore because there are a lot of submerged rocks, so I was a fair way out from shore, but I'm paddling along. And as I got further south, I did notice that the waves were getting bigger, but I thought, oh, it's just because I'm getting to a more exposed area, and I didn't think too much about it because I was focused on my goal. I am going to get to the point where I can see. And the further I got, the harder it got, and I wasn't even sure whether this was a good idea anymore, but I'm proceeding because I keep thinking, can't be much further, can't be much further. Well, eventually I got to the spot where I could see the gap. And then I realized I needed to turn around, but by then the conditions were actually really bad. And the waves were really quite high when you're in a little kayak just sitting on the water. And I realised when I turned I was going to have to be side on to the waves, and that was going to be a completely different kettle of fish. And then I don't know anybody else who's ever paddled. You know how sometimes you think I'm doing this easy and then you turn around and you realise it's because the wind and the current was with you? And when you're going back the other way, it's really, really hard. Well, I managed to get the kayak around, but that's when I realised how far I was from where I'd started, how difficult it was going to be to get back, how far out from the shore I needed to be, and how bad the conditions were. Now, all of that was there, but while I was focused on my goal, I just managed to not think about it, to not notice it. But once that goal was not my main focus, that's when I felt overwhelmed by the conditions around me, and I was afraid. And I'm grateful God did get me back. I don't think I managed that in my own strength, and I was a little bit more respectful of kayaking and the conditions after that. But I can kind of see how Peter might have done that, how while he was focused on his goal, he was fine. But the instant he stopped being focused on that goal, the conditions overwhelmed him. So Peter is sinking. Peter, you guys, with your imagination, you're sinking below the water. You've just had time to call out, "Save me, Lord," and put your hand up. How did you feel when Jesus grabbed hold of your hand? When you knew you were saved from your watery grave. When you knew that his strength was stronger than the pull of the current on your wet clothes. Have you ever experienced that? And I know our young people who've had to do water safety where you have to go swimming in your clothes. It is not a nice feeling. I don't know whether Peter could swim. Often people couldn't back then. How did you feel knowing that you were saved? Church, how do you feel? All of you now, how do you feel knowing that when you place your faith in Jesus, ask him to save you and form a connection, a relationship with him, that you too are saved from the grave? How do you feel about that? How do you feel knowing that you are holding his hand? But more than just being saved from death, you are safe with him from the things that threaten to overwhelm you. As Jesus said, don't be afraid. The I am is here. He's here with us. And just as he promised in Isaiah 41:10, he is upholding us in his righteous right hand. How do you feel? But then Jesus says, Peter, you have so little faith. Why did you doubt me? Hang on, Peter. How did you feel when Jesus said you only have a little bit of faith? You were just walking on the water. Now, I don't know about you, but that would take a massive amount of faith for me to even attempt. And Jesus says, you have so little faith. you others in the boat, how did you feel when Jesus said that Peter, who walked on water, had little faith? How much faith did you have? You're still in the boat. Look where only a little faith got Peter. Only a little. You know, there is a sense that this is a reprimand, and I think that was part of it, but I think this is also a promise. Look where only a little faith can get you. Where would medium-sized faith get you? Where would great faith get you? This is only the start. This is only the taste of what is possible. Jesus also asked, "Why did you doubt?" Now, this puzzled me for a little while because I'm thinking, what was Peter doubting? Did he doubt that Jesus could make him walk on water? No, because he'd already been doing that. I actually think maybe we need to look further back to understand this. Maybe this question, and even possibly the reprimand, is referring to Peter's initial doubt. So Peter's initial doubt was, if it is you, ask me to come. So there's two parts to that. If it is you, I'm not entirely sure that you are who you say you are, that you are the I am. But if it is you, ask me to come because I'm not entirely sure if you still want me because you sent me away. Think about the circumstances of Peter's request. He's had an emotional, demanding, exhausting, frightening day. The last thing Jesus has said to him is essentially to go away. Now, that was not because Jesus didn't want Peter. It was because the plan needed to go ahead. But perhaps Peter's doubt is a relational one. A cry of the heart, do you still want me, Jesus? And Jesus' answer to Peter's doubt is a very simple yet profound, come. I want you to really hear that invitation today. Let it speak louder than any doubts you might have. Jesus is saying, come. And Peter does. It seems like the connection between them is strong. But then Peter loses the connection as he begins to focus on the things around him. It's a bit like our dog Molly, whose Bluetooth connection failed her when she was feeling anxious. Does that happen to us too? We're going strong in our spiritual walk, and then something happens to cause us to lose our connection with God. Perhaps a struggle that we're going through, perhaps a sense of our own sin, perhaps fear or worry. And then the doubts come creeping in. Will God really help me when I've sinned again? When I've failed again? Or when I have only a little to offer? When I feel like I'm not enough? Does God really want me? I've heard that little voice. Have you heard that little voice? We lose our connection as we focus on all the things that aren't right in our spiritual life. To these doubts, Jesus responds, come. You of little faith, why are you taking your eyes off me? Why are you doubting my love for you? At the heart of this story is a beautiful relationship between Peter and Jesus. They had a strong connection. Yes, it was flawed on Peter's end, as it is on us, on our end. We are flawed human beings. But even when we are not faithful, God is. That is his character. We have abundant evidence that it is so, yet we still doubt. But even in our doubts, God remains faithful to reach out and take us by the hand in response to our cry for help. Let's finish the story, verses 32 and 33. When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Another miracle, and it's just kind of stated on the end of the story there. There have been so many on this day, but that in itself is an incredible miracle. So the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshipped him. "You really are the Son of God," they exclaimed. This story is about how important it is to know who Jesus is and to then depend on him. To know that he is the Son of God, to know his character of faithfulness, to know that he is asking us to come, that he wants us. It is so important to know him, and not just an academic knowledge, but an experiential knowledge, to know who Jesus is. Okay, as we finish up, let's just tie some threads together. I'm going to ask you to reflect on some questions to get a bit of practical application here. Now, some of these questions will resonate with you and some won't, and that's fine. But if something resonates with you, I just invite you to take that question and mull it over for the rest of today, or as you come into the week, pray about it. So the practical application is faith. Faith is trust in action. So for example, how useful is it to trust Jesus but stay in the boat? It's only when you get out of the boat that the trust becomes faith. And there are two aspects here that I want us to explore. Number one, faith starts with answering the invitation to come. Psalm 27 verse 8, one of my favourite verses, says, "My heart has heard you say, 'Come and talk with me.' My heart responds, 'Lord, I am coming.'" How good are you at answering God's call to come and spend time with him? As I said before, I love spending time in the Bible, but for me, prayer is the area where I want to challenge myself this year. The second part of coming is to bring him our only a little. How often do you feel that you don't have enough, maybe even that you're not enough to serve God? What would happen if you came to him with your only a little? This is the trust part of the equation, the part where we learn to overcome our doubts about who God is and how he feels about us, the part where we lose our self-dependence and gain confidence in him. This is establishing our Bluetooth connection. But the second part is to put our trust into action, and I'm afraid that means we have to get out of the boat. The boat is our comfort zone. Faith doesn't grow when we are comfortable. It is the experience of needing to depend fully on God that grows our faith. So where is your comfort zone? How might God be asking you to step outside it? Whether that's at church, at home, in your communities. Okay, so those are the two aspects of faith, but there are also two settings we need to consider these questions in, just as there were two miracles in today's stories. The first is the storm. This is the personal setting. What are your own personal storms at the moment? Where are you struggling? What would happen if you brought your only a little faith to Jesus? How can you make sure you are drawing closer to him in the storm, keeping your eyes focused on him, reaching out and grabbing hold of his hand? But what about the miracle of feeding the 5,000? When the disciples brought their only a little to Jesus in this setting, the miracle that happened wasn't personal, it was expansive, benefiting a whole community. Where are the needs in your communities? Perhaps in this community of the Eastern Shore, perhaps in this church community, perhaps in your family, workplace, wherever your community might be, where are the needs? What would happen if you brought your only a little to Jesus and trusted him to use it and use you in that situation? Dream big for a moment. Dream of that need being satisfied. Do we understand the power that we can connect to through faith? Do we understand that God's desire is still to relieve suffering? He is still compassionate towards us. Are we willing to let go of self-dependence and listen to his plan and submit to his plan as his disciples? This is all pretty challenging. It would require us to step out of the boat. But imagine what could happen. Last year, I stepped out of my comfort zone when I started uni, and I don't want to share that story today, but what I do want to share with you is that I learnt something through that experience, that God is faithful. You see, it's not about focusing on my only a little, and it's not about focusing on how great the need is or the size of the storm. It's about focusing on how faithful God is. Faithful to his character of love and goodness. Faithful to his promises, especially his promise to always be with us. We can be confident to bring our only a little to him, knowing that in his hands it will be enough. In fact, it will be more than enough. In his hands, I am enough and you are enough. Will you join me today in responding to Jesus' call to come and bring him our only a little? Let's get out of the boat, experience his faithfulness, and see what he will do in 2026.